Chapter 1. The Road to War. The year was 2003. The world held its breath. War was on the horizon, and no one knew what would happen next. The United States accused Iraq of hiding something dangerous, something that could destroy entire cities. These were weapons of mass destruction, or WMDs. Iraq's leader, Saddam Hussein, denied it. He said there were no such weapons. The world watched as the argument grew louder and louder. People wondered, who was telling the truth? The United Nations got involved. Inspectors were sent to Iraq. Their job was to look for these weapons. They searched factories, warehouses, and hidden bunkers. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. But they found nothing. Still, the U.S. was not convinced. President George W. Bush stood before the world. He said Iraq was a threat, a danger that could not be ignored. He claimed Saddam Hussein was working with terrorists. Could this be true? The idea made many people afraid. In Britain, Prime Minister Tony Blair agreed with Bush. He said action was needed. Together, they spoke of freedom and safety. They said removing Saddam Hussein would bring peace to Iraq and the world. But not everyone agreed. France and Germany asked for more time. They wanted the inspectors to finish their work. Russia said war should be the last choice. Protests broke out in cities across the globe. People marched in the streets, holding signs that said, "No to war." Despite the protests, the U.S. and its allies decided to act. They believed waiting was too dangerous. On March 17, 2003, President Bush gave Saddam Hussein an ultimatum. He said, "Leave Iraq in 48 hours, or face war." The clock was ticking. Saddam refused to leave. He stayed in Baghdad, the capital of Iraq. His army prepared for a fight. The tension grew thicker with each passing hour. Families in Iraq waited in fear. What would happen next? On March 19, 2003, the first bombs fell. The U.S. called it shock and awe. The goal was to strike quickly and powerfully. Explosions lit up the night sky over Baghdad. The war had begun. For many people, it was a time of uncertainty and fear. Why had things come to this? Some believed the U.S. and its allies were protecting the world. Others felt it was a mistake, a rush to war without enough proof. As you listen to this story, think about the choices made. Could things have been different? Were there other paths to peace? The answers may not be simple, but the questions are important. Chapter 2. Weapons of Mass Destruction? In 2003, the United States believed Iraq had dangerous weapons. These were called weapons of mass destruction, WMDs. They could kill thousands of people. They could destroy cities. The U.S. government said Saddam Hussein, Iraq's leader, was hiding them. But was it true? Many people were afraid. If Iraq had these weapons, the world was in danger. The U.S. government showed photos and reports. They said Iraq was building secret weapons in hidden places. They said Iraq was a threat that could not wait. But not everyone agreed. Some people asked questions. Where was the proof? If these weapons were so dangerous, why had no one seen them? The United Nations sent inspectors to Iraq. Their job was to search for the truth. The inspectors went to many places. They visited factories and military bases. They looked inside storage buildings and underground bunkers. Sometimes they found old equipment, but no weapons. Still, they continued their work, hoping to find answers. Saddam Hussein said there were no WMDs. He told the world he had nothing to hide. But could he be trusted? Many people did not believe him. They remembered the past, how he had used chemical weapons before. Could he be lying now? The U.S. was growing impatient. Officials said the inspections were too slow. They believed Saddam was playing a dangerous game. They warned that waiting too long could be deadly. Every day, the pressure grew stronger. Then came a moment that shocked the world. In February 2003, the U.S. Secretary of State, Colin Powell, spoke at the United Nations. He showed pictures. He played recordings. He said Iraq had secret trucks carrying deadly chemicals. He said Iraq had hidden factories making poisons. The room was silent. The world listened. People were confused. Some believed the U.S., others were not sure. Could these photos really prove Iraq had WMDs? Many wondered if the war was the right choice. Meanwhile, in Iraq, people were afraid. They heard the news. They saw the tension growing. Would their country be attacked? Families worried about their children. They asked themselves, what will happen if war comes? Back in the U.S., people had different opinions. Some wanted to stop Saddam Hussein quickly. They said he was dangerous. Others thought the war was not needed. They wanted more proof before taking action. In March 2003, the U.S. and its allies decided they could not wait. They said Iraq had WMDs and action was necessary. The war began. Planes flew over Iraq. Bombs fell on cities. Soldiers moved in. People hid in their homes, waiting for what would come next. After Baghdad fell, the search for WMDs continued. U.S. forces searched palaces, bunkers, and military sites. They found documents, weapons, and equipment. But they did not find WMDs. Weeks passed, then months. Still, nothing. People started to ask new questions. If the weapons were not found, had the war been a mistake? Some felt angry. They believed they had been misled. Others thought Saddam Hussein had hidden the weapons somewhere else. The mystery continued. In 2004, a major report was released. It said Iraq did not have WMDs. The world was shocked. How could this happen? Many people felt betrayed. They wondered, was the war really necessary? For Iraqis, life had changed forever. The war brought destruction and fear. Families lost their homes. Cities were damaged. The search for WMDs had led to a war that changed their lives. In the U.S. and around the world, people debated. Some said the war was right, even without weapons. They believed removing Saddam Hussein was important. Others said the war should never have happened. Years later, the question remained. Why were no WMDs found? Some believed the intelligence was wrong. Others thought it was a mistake. The search for answers continued, but one thing was clear. War had already changed Iraq and the world. And so, the story of WMDs became one of the biggest mysteries in modern history. The world had gone to war, but the weapons were never found. The search ended, but the consequences remained. Chapter 3. Shock and Awe. March 20th, 2003. A dark night in Baghdad. The city was quiet, waiting. Then, suddenly, explosions. Bright flashes lit up the sky. The sound of bombs filled the air. The invasion had begun. The United States and its allies had launched a massive attack. They called it shock and awe. The goal was to strike hard and fast, to break the Iraqi army's will to fight. Thousands of missiles and bombs hit key targets: government buildings, military bases, and communication centers. People in Baghdad watched in fear. Some ran to their homes. Others stood in the streets, staring at the sky. Smoke rose over the city. The ground shook with every explosion. Families held each other tightly, praying for safety. Meanwhile, in the United States, people watched the war unfold on their television screens. News reporters described the attack in real time. Cameras showed flames and destruction. The world was watching. American soldiers moved quickly. They entered Iraq from the south. Tanks rolled through the desert. Helicopters flew overhead. The goal was clear: reach Baghdad, capture Saddam Hussein, and end his rule. But the Iraqi forces were ready to fight back. In the early hours, resistance was light. Some Iraqi soldiers surrendered without a fight. Others fled, disappearing into the night. But not everyone gave up. In some cities, Iraqi troops fought hard. They fired rockets and machine guns at the advancing forces. The battle had begun. As the U.S. troops moved forward, they faced another challenge: the desert. Sandstorms covered the sky in thick, orange dust. It was hard to see, hard to breathe. Soldiers struggled to move through the choking air. But they pushed on, step by step. Baghdad was the main target. The city was heavily defended. The streets were lined with soldiers, weapons, and barricades. Saddam Hussein's government promised to fight until the end. His voice echoed on Iraqi television, urging his people to resist. But the U.S. forces were strong. They had advanced weapons, fast-moving vehicles, and years of training. Slowly, they moved closer to the capital. The streets of Baghdad grew more dangerous. Gunfire erupted from buildings. Snipers hid on rooftops. Every street became a battlefield. In the heart of the city, fear and confusion spread. Some people wanted the Americans to come. They hoped for freedom and a better future. Others were angry. They saw the invasion as an attack on their homeland. Families packed their belongings and fled the city. Roads were filled with cars, bicycles, and people on foot. As days passed, the Iraqi government began to crumble. Key leaders disappeared. Communication broke down. Chaos spread across the city. Looters broke into stores and government buildings. Baghdad was falling apart. Then came a moment the world would never forget. On April 9, 2003, U.S. troops entered Baghdad's main square. In the center stood a giant statue of Saddam Hussein. Soldiers threw ropes around it. They pulled and pulled until finally the statue crashed to the ground. People cheered. Some climbed on the statue, waving flags. Others hit it with their shoes, a symbol of anger and revenge. The world watched as a powerful symbol of Saddam's rule was destroyed. But the war was not over. Saddam Hussein was still missing. His loyal fighters had not given up. In the days that followed, gunfire and explosions continued. The search for Saddam and his top officials became urgent. At the same time, U.S. leaders faced a new challenge. Iraq was without a government. Who would take control? How would peace be restored? These questions had no easy answers. For the Iraqi people, life had changed forever. Schools were closed. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Water and electricity were gone in many parts of the city. Families struggled to find food. Some feared the future. Others hoped for better days ahead. In Washington, President George W. Bush spoke to the world. He said the war was going well. He believed Iraq would soon be free. But not everyone agreed. Some people feared the worst was yet to come. Chapter 4. The Fall of Baghdad. April 2003. The world watched as U.S. forces reached Baghdad. The city, once full of life, was now filled with smoke and fear. Streets were empty. Shops were closed. Families stayed inside, waiting for what would happen next. After weeks of bombing, the Iraqi army could not stop the U.S. troops. They entered Baghdad quickly. Tanks rolled through the streets. Soldiers walked carefully, their eyes scanning every building. In some places, there was silence. In others, there was gunfire. The war was not over yet. Saddam Hussein's government was collapsing. His soldiers no longer followed orders. Some took off their uniforms and disappeared. Others surrendered. Some fought until the end. But it was clear, the government was falling apart. On April 9th, something incredible happened. U.S. soldiers gathered in Ferdo Square, a famous place in Baghdad. In the middle of the square stood a huge statue of Saddam Hussein. For years, it had been a symbol of his power. Now, people were ready to see it fall. Iraqis gathered around the statue. They shouted, they cheered, they wanted change. A group of men climbed onto the statue. They tied a rope around its neck. Slowly, they pulled. But the statue did not move. Then, an American tank arrived. Soldiers helped pull it down. Finally, the statue crashed to the ground. People cheered. Some danced. Some cried. It was a powerful moment. The world watched on TV. It seemed like a new beginning. But as the statue fell, so did the order in Baghdad. Without a government, there were no rules. Police disappeared. Soldiers were gone. The city fell into chaos. Shops were broken into. People ran through the streets carrying televisions, furniture, and food. Government offices were emptied. Important documents were thrown away. Even hospitals were looted. Doctors begged for help. But there was no one to stop the thieves. At first, some people were happy. They believed they were free. They thought life would get better. But soon, fear replaced joy. Armed men roamed the streets. Gangs took control of neighborhoods. Everyone was afraid to go outside. Fires burned across the city. Smoke filled the air. People who once lived normal lives were now searching for food and water. Electricity was gone. Clean water was hard to find. Children cried from hunger. Mothers worried about their future. Saddam Hussein was nowhere to be found. He had disappeared. His voice was no longer on television. His soldiers were gone. Some said he had fled to another country. Others believed he was hiding somewhere in Iraq. No one knew for sure. In Washington, President George W. Bush declared victory. He said the war had been a success. He believed Iraq would soon be free and peaceful. But in Baghdad, people saw a different picture. There was no leader, no safety, no future. The U.S. military tried to control the situation. They set up checkpoints. They searched for Saddam and his supporters. But it was not enough. Anger was growing. Some Iraqis welcomed the Americans. Others saw them as invaders. The tension in the city grew every day. Religious and political groups took advantage of the chaos. Some wanted power. Others wanted revenge. Old enemies fought each other. Baghdad, once united, was now divided. In the middle of all this, ordinary people suffered the most. They wanted peace. They wanted their lives back. But all they could do was wait. The fall of Baghdad was not just the fall of a city. It was the fall of an entire system. For years, Saddam Hussein had ruled with fear. Now he was gone, and the future was uncertain. In the following weeks, U.S. forces searched for Saddam everywhere. They went to his palaces. They searched tunnels and underground bunkers. But he had vanished. The mystery of his whereabouts added to the tension in Iraq. Meanwhile, the world watched closely. Some countries supported the war. Others said it was a mistake. People asked, was it worth it? What comes next? Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Baghdad was still in chaos. The streets were dangerous. Fear was everywhere. And yet people tried to rebuild their lives. Some opened small shops. Others cleaned up the broken streets. They had hope, but they also had doubts. The fall of Baghdad was a turning point. It was a moment of change, filled with hope and fear. Some believed Iraq would finally be free. Others feared that the worst was yet to come. Chapter 5. A Leader in Hiding. April 2003. Baghdad had fallen. Saddam Hussein was gone. His government had collapsed, his army had vanished, and his palaces were empty. But one question remained. Where was he? The U.S. military searched everywhere. They searched palaces, bunkers, and military bases. They searched deep in the desert, in cities, in small villages. But there was no sign of Saddam. The world waited. People wondered, had he escaped? Was he hiding in another country? Or was he still in Iraq, watching and waiting? The U.S. called him a wanted man. Posters with his face were everywhere. A reward was offered, $25 million for information leading to his capture. Some Iraqis wanted to help. Others still supported him. In the months after the fall of Baghdad, rumors spread. Some people said they had seen him in the mountains. Others claimed he was in Syria. Some believed he had disguised himself and was living among ordinary people. But the truth was, Saddam was still in Iraq. He was moving from place to place, staying one step ahead of the soldiers looking for him. He traveled at night, avoiding roads, hiding in homes of loyal supporters. The search continued. The U.S. used special forces, intelligence agents, and high-tech equipment. They followed every lead. They listened to phone calls. They questioned people who once worked for Saddam. But he was always one step ahead. Months passed. Iraq remained in chaos. Bombs exploded in the streets. Armed groups grew stronger. People were afraid. Some believed Saddam was still controlling his loyal followers from hiding. The U.S. military knew they had to find him. Then, in December 2003, everything changed. A tip led U.S. forces to a small village near Tikrit, Saddam's hometown. They had been searching the area for weeks, but this time something felt different. Soldiers moved in, carefully checking every house, every farm. In one farmhouse, they found a small clue: dirty clothes and empty food containers. Someone had been living there recently. The search became more intense. Dogs barked. Soldiers moved quickly. Then one of them spotted something strange in the ground. It was a hole. A narrow opening covered with dirt and leaves. Carefully, they removed the cover. Below, in the darkness, was a tiny underground room. A man was inside. He had a long beard, messy hair, and tired eyes. It was Saddam Hussein. The once powerful leader, now dirty and weak, was hiding underground in a tiny space no bigger than a closet. He had no weapons. He had no soldiers. He was alone. The soldiers called it the spider hole. It was small, dark, and cold. Saddam had been living there for weeks, eating simple food and drinking bottled water. He had cash, a gun, and a few personal items, but he did not fight back. The world was shocked. Photos of Saddam's capture spread quickly. In one, he looked tired and confused. In another, a doctor examined him, checking his health. People could not believe that the once feared dictator had been found in such a simple place. When the news broke, Iraqis reacted in different ways. Some celebrated in the streets, dancing and shouting with joy. Others felt afraid, wondering what would happen next. Would there be more violence? Would Iraq finally find peace? In the U.S., President George W. Bush spoke to the nation. He said, "The tyrant is captured. The war in Iraq is one step closer to victory." But even with Saddam in custody, the violence in Iraq did not stop. Armed groups continued to fight. The future was still uncertain. After his capture, Saddam was taken to a secret location. He was questioned for hours. The world wanted answers. Where were the weapons of mass destruction? Why did he start the war? But Saddam remained silent. He showed no fear. Over the next months, he was held in a guarded prison. He was given food, clothes, and books. But he spent most of his time alone, thinking about his past and his future. He still believed he was Iraq's true leader. Finally, in 2004, Saddam was put on trial. The world watched as he stood in court, dressed in a simple suit, no longer the powerful man he once was. He was accused of crimes against his own people, torture, murder, and war crimes. Many Iraqis wanted justice. They remembered the years of fear under his rule. Families of victims cried in the courtroom, hoping for punishment. Saddam defended himself, claiming he was still Iraq's president. But the court found him guilty. On December 30th, 2006, Saddam Hussein was executed. His death marked the end of an era. Some people felt justice had been done. Others believed it would only bring more problems to Iraq. The capture of Saddam Hussein was a moment the world would never forget. It was the end of a long search, but not the end of Iraq's troubles. The country was still divided, and violence continued. Looking back, the story of Saddam's capture is full of lessons. It shows how power can change. It reminds us that no leader is untouchable, and it makes us think, what happens after a leader falls? Before we begin, Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on WooEnglish. Remember, this content is specially made for WooEnglish listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of WooEnglish's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6, A Country in Chaos. After Saddam Hussein was captured, many people thought Iraq would become peaceful. They hoped for a better future. They dreamed of freedom and stability. But things did not go as expected. Without a strong government, Iraq fell into chaos. There were no clear leaders. There were no clear rules. Different groups wanted power. Some wanted to control cities. Others wanted to control oil and money. Iraq was breaking apart. Violence spread across the country. Bombs exploded in markets, on roads, and near schools. People were afraid to leave their homes. At night, gunshots echoed through the streets. Every day, more and more people were killed or injured. The U.S. Army tried to bring order. They set up checkpoints. They trained new police officers and soldiers. But the situation was difficult. Many Iraqis did not trust the new government. Some saw the U.S. troops as occupiers, not helpers. Armed groups started to fight. Some groups were loyal to Saddam Hussein. They wanted him back. Others wanted revenge for years of suffering. There were also religious groups, Shia and Sunni Muslims, who began fighting each other. Old tensions grew worse. People who once lived side by side became enemies. Neighbors turned against each other. Families left their homes to escape violence. Cities that were once full of life became battlegrounds. In the streets of Baghdad, life became dangerous. Car bombs exploded without warning. Militias set up roadblocks. They asked people who they were and where they were going. Fear was everywhere. The Iraqi people felt trapped. Some wanted to help rebuild their country. Others wanted to escape. Many families packed their bags and left for safer places. Those who stayed had to live with fear and uncertainty. Meanwhile, outside forces took advantage of the chaos. Terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda entered Iraq. They saw an opportunity to spread their influence. They recruited young men who had lost everything. They promised them power and revenge. The U.S. military faced a new enemy, one they had not expected. Suicide bombers targeted military bases. Convoys were attacked on highways. It became clear the war was not over. It was changing into something bigger and darker. Political leaders tried to form a new government. Elections were held. Leaders made speeches. Promises were made. But the people did not feel safe. Trust was hard to find. For ordinary Iraqis, life was a struggle. Finding food, water, and medicine became harder every day. Electricity was often cut. Schools were closed. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Mothers worried for their children. Fathers feared they would not return home safely. Many wondered, was life better under Saddam? Some said yes. Others said no. But one thing was clear. Iraq was no longer the same country. In Washington, leaders debated what to do. Some believed more troops were needed. Others thought it was time to leave Iraq. The world watched closely, waiting to see what would happen next. In the midst of this chaos, hope still existed. Some Iraqis worked to rebuild their communities. Teachers reopened schools, even with little supplies. Doctors treated the wounded despite the dangers. People still dreamed of peace. Religious leaders called for calm. Community leaders tried to bring people together. But violence was stronger. It seemed like peace was slipping away. Iraq's oil, once its greatest strength, became a reason for more conflict. Armed groups fought over oil fields and pipelines. Smugglers made money from the black market. The economy suffered. Jobs disappeared. Poverty increased. Children who once went to school were now learning to survive in a war zone. Young boys carried guns instead of books. Girls stayed inside, afraid of being kidnapped. The future looked uncertain. Despite the danger, the U.S. military continued its mission. They searched for insurgents. They built new bases. They tried to train the Iraqi army. But progress was slow. Years passed, and the violence continued. Some days were calm. Other days were filled with bloodshed. People asked, when will it end? When will Iraq be safe again? The fall of Saddam Hussein was supposed to bring freedom. Instead, it brought confusion. Iraq had no direction, no leader, no peace. As the conflict dragged on, the world started to lose interest. News stations focused on other stories. But for the people of Iraq, the war was not over. It was their daily life. This chapter in Iraq's history is full of pain and loss. But it is also a story of strength, a story of survival, a story of people who refuse to give up hope, even in the darkest times. The chaos in Iraq showed the world how hard it is to rebuild a country after war. It showed how fragile peace can be. It taught important lessons, but at a great cost. Even today, Iraq is still trying to recover. The scars of war remain, But the people continue to fight for a better tomorrow. They still hope for peace. They still hope for a future without fear. Chapter 7. The Rise of New Enemies. After the fall of Saddam Hussein, Iraq was left in chaos. There was no strong government. There was no law. People felt lost and afraid. In this confusion, new enemies appeared, enemies more dangerous than before. Armed groups took advantage of the situation. They saw an opportunity to gain power. Some were former soldiers of Saddam's army. Others were religious extremists. They all had different goals, but they shared one thing. They wanted control. One of the most dangerous groups was Al-Qaeda. This group was known around the world. They had attacked the United States on September 11th, 2001. Now they had come to Iraq. They wanted to turn the country into a battlefield. Al-Qaeda leaders saw Iraq as the perfect place to fight the U.S. They found new fighters, trained them, and gave them weapons. Young men, angry and without hope, joined them. Some had lost their families in the war. Others had lost their homes. They wanted revenge. At first, Al-Qaeda operated in secret. They hid in small villages and deserts. They planned attacks and waited for the right moment. Then, suddenly, they struck. Car bombs exploded in busy streets. Markets were destroyed. Suicide bombers targeted police stations and government offices. The attacks were deadly, and they happened often. People became afraid to leave their homes. Baghdad, once a lively city, turned into a place of fear. Families avoided crowded places. Schools closed. Hospitals were filled with victims. The sound of sirens became part of daily life. The U.S. military tried to fight back. They sent more soldiers. They searched for Al-Qaeda leaders. They used helicopters, drones, and special forces. But the enemy was hard to find. They moved quickly. They hid among ordinary people. Al-Qaeda was not alone. Other groups also joined the fight. Some wanted to control land. Others wanted to control oil. Iraq was becoming a battleground for many different fighters. The violence spread beyond Iraq. Neighboring countries watched with worry. Iran, Syria, and Saudi Arabia feared the chaos would reach them. Some secretly helped fighters inside Iraq. Others sent weapons and money. The conflict was growing larger. For the Iraqi people, life was difficult. They faced danger from all sides. Some joined militias to protect their families. Others tried to leave the country, searching for safety in other lands. The rise of new enemies created deep divisions in Iraq. People who once lived together peacefully now saw each other as enemies. Sunni and Shia Muslims, who had different beliefs, started fighting each other. Friendships were broken, communities were divided. Al-Qaeda used these divisions to grow stronger. They spread fear through social media and propaganda. They told people they were fighting for justice. They promised power and revenge. Many believed them. The war was changing. It was no longer just about Iraq. It was about power, religion, and control. The world watched in shock as Iraq fell deeper into violence. Despite the danger, some Iraqis tried to resist. Brave police officers and soldiers fought back. Community leaders called for peace. Religious leaders asked people to stay calm. But it was not easy. The new enemies were everywhere. In 2006, a major attack shocked the world. A famous religious shrine in Samara was bombed. The explosion destroyed part of the holy site. The attack made people even more angry. Violence increased. Revenge attacks followed. The U.S. realized they needed a new plan. They sent more troops and worked with local Iraqi leaders. They called it the surge. More soldiers meant more security. For a time, the violence decreased, but it was not enough to stop Al-Qaeda completely. Al-Qaeda changed its strategy. They hid deeper, used different tactics, and waited for their chance to rise again. They were patient. They were determined. Years later, another group emerged from the chaos. They called themselves the Islamic State, or ISIS. They were even more brutal than Al-Qaeda. They wanted to create their own country. Their fighters took over cities and ruled with fear. The invasion of Iraq had opened the door to these new threats. The war that started in 2003 was not over. It had only changed shape. The rise of new enemies showed how quickly war can grow. It showed how difficult it is to bring peace once violence has begun. Iraq had become a place of endless conflict. As you listen to this story, think about how chaos creates opportunities for dangerous people. Think about the choices leaders must make to stop violence before it spreads. Iraq, once full of hope, was now full of fear. But the people had not given up. They still dreamed of peace. They still wanted a future without war. The rise of new enemies had changed Iraq forever, but the fight for peace was not over yet. Chapter 8. The Middle East. Shaken. The invasion of Iraq in 2003 did not only change Iraq. It changed the entire Middle East. The effects spread like ripples in water, touching every country in the region. Old rivalries grew worse. New conflicts began. Fear and uncertainty spread across borders. Before the war, Iraq was ruled by Saddam Hussein. He was a strong leader, but he ruled with fear. He kept his enemies under control. After his fall, everything changed. The balance of power in the Middle East shifted. And with that shift came trouble. Countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia saw an opportunity. They had been rivals for a long time. They both wanted to be the most powerful country in the region. The war in Iraq gave them a new battleground. Iran supported the Shia Muslims in Iraq. They sent money, weapons, and soldiers. They wanted Iraq to become their ally. Iran's leaders believed that a Shia-led Iraq would make them stronger. They worked quietly, helping groups that shared their beliefs. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, supported the Sunni Muslims. They did not want Iran to gain more power. They feared a stronger Iran could threaten their own country. So they helped Sunni groups in Iraq, hoping to stop Iran's influence. This silent battle between Iran and Saudi Arabia made Iraq even more unstable. Instead of one war, Iraq now had many small wars inside it. People were caught in the middle. Families were divided. Friends became enemies. The war also affected neighboring countries in other ways. Millions of Iraqis fled their homes. They crossed into Syria and Jordan. Refugee camps grew crowded. Countries struggled to help so many people. The war was no longer just Iraq's problem. It was everyone's problem. Terrorist groups used the chaos to grow. Al-Qaeda spread its ideas beyond Iraq. It inspired people in other countries. Attacks happened in cities like Riyadh, Amman, and Beirut. People felt unsafe, even far from the war. In Syria, the government watched closely. They feared the U.S. might invade them next. Syria's leaders increased their military power. They prepared for the worst. In Turkey, leaders worried about their border. Kurdish groups in northern Iraq were gaining strength. Turkey feared they would demand independence and cause trouble inside its own borders. Across the region, leaders made new decisions. Some formed alliances. Others prepared for war. Everyone felt the tension. The invasion of Iraq had changed everything. Meanwhile, oil prices went up. Iraq had some of the largest oil reserves in the world. The war made it difficult to produce oil. This affected the global economy. Countries that depended on oil, like the U.S. and China, felt the impact. Gasoline became more expensive. Businesses struggled. In Israel and Palestine, the situation became more tense. Some groups used the war as an excuse to attack. The region became even more unstable. The war also changed how people in the Middle East viewed the United States. Some believed the U.S. came to help. Others thought it was an invasion for oil and power. Protests broke out in several countries. The Middle East was divided more than ever. The invasion created a ripple effect that did not stop. It led to more wars, more suffering, and more uncertainty. The dream of peace seemed far away. Despite the problems, some people tried to stay hopeful. In Iraq, leaders worked to rebuild. In other countries, people prayed for a better future. They hoped that one day the region would find stability. The Middle East, once a place of rich culture and history, was now a region of conflict and fear. The war had opened old wounds and created new ones. As you listen to this story, think about how one event can change many lives. Think about how war affects not just soldiers, but entire nations. The invasion of Iraq was supposed to bring freedom. Instead, it brought division, and a Middle East shaken to its core. Chapter 9. Voices from Around the World. When the U.S. invaded Iraq in 2003, the world watched. Some countries supported the war. Others said it was a mistake. People everywhere had different opinions. In the United States, the government believed the war was necessary. President George W. Bush said Iraq had dangerous weapons. He said Saddam Hussein was a threat. Many Americans supported him. They believed the war would bring peace and security. But not everyone agreed. Some Americans thought the war was wrong. They asked, "Where is the proof?" They worried about the cost. They feared many soldiers would die. Across the country, people protested. They marched in the streets, holding signs. They shouted, "No war!" They wanted peace, not conflict. In Britain, Prime Minister Tony Blair stood with the U.S. He said Saddam Hussein must be stopped. Britain sent soldiers to Iraq. Some people in Britain supported the war. They believed their government was doing the right thing. But others were angry. They believed the war was based on lies. Thousands of people gathered in London to protest. They demanded answers. France and Germany did not support the invasion. Their leaders believed war was not the solution. They wanted more inspections, more time. They said diplomacy should come first. French President Jacques Chirac spoke strongly against the war. Germany's Chancellor Gerhard Schröder agreed. Both countries refused to send troops. At the United Nations, the debate was intense. Some countries like Spain and Italy supported the war. They trusted the U.S. and wanted to help. But others argued for peace. They said war would bring destruction and suffering. The world was divided. In the Middle East, the invasion brought fear and anger. Some Iraqis hoped the war would bring freedom. They wanted Saddam gone. They believed life would improve. But others felt different. They saw the invasion as an attack on their country. They did not trust the U.S. They believed it was about oil and power. In countries like Saudi Arabia and Egypt, people worried. They feared the war would spread. They thought their own countries could be next. Leaders warned the U.S. to be careful. They wanted Iraq to stay united. They did not want more violence in the region. Protests happened across the world. In cities like Paris, Berlin, and Tokyo, people marched. They held banners saying, "No blood for oil." Millions of people came together to speak against the war. They wanted peace. They believed diplomacy could solve the problem. In Canada, the government chose not to join the invasion. Prime Minister Jean Chrétien said Canada would not send soldiers. He believed the war needed approval from the United Nations. Many Canadians supported his decision. They felt proud that their country stood for peace. The reactions in Africa and Asia were mixed. Some governments supported the U.S. They wanted to stay allies. Others stayed silent. They did not want to take sides. Some people in these regions felt the war had nothing to do with them. Others feared it could create more problems in the world. In Russia and China, leaders spoke against the war. They said it was illegal. They believed the U.S. should not act without international support. Russian President Vladimir Putin warned that the war could make the world more dangerous. China's leaders worried about global stability. They believed war would hurt the economy. Despite the opposition, the war went ahead. The U.S. and its allies moved quickly into Iraq. The world could only watch. Some hoped for a quick victory. Others feared for the worst. Months passed. As the situation in Iraq worsened, more people spoke out. They asked, "Where are the weapons of mass destruction?" They demanded answers. They felt betrayed. Many who had supported the war now had doubts. In the U.S., families of soldiers waited anxiously. Some lost loved ones. Protests grew stronger. People wanted their troops to come home. They believed the war had gone on too long. In Britain, Tony Blair faced pressure. People questioned his decisions. Protests continued. Some members of his government resigned in disagreement. The war divided the country. Around the world, opinions shifted. Some people still believed the invasion was the right thing. They said Saddam Hussein was gone, and that was good. But others saw only destruction and chaos. They believed the war had made Iraq worse. Media played a big role. Television, newspapers, and the internet showed images of bombed cities and suffering people. The world saw the reality of war. They saw the faces of children caught in the violence. Hearts broke. Opinions changed. Years later, the debate continued. People asked, "Was it worth it?" Some said yes. They believed Iraq had a chance for a better future. Others said no. They believed the war had created more problems than it solved. The invasion of Iraq was a moment that changed the world. It showed how divided people could be. It showed how difficult decisions in war can be. As you listen to this story, think about the voices from around the world. Think about the questions they asked. What would you have done? Would you have supported the war or stood against it? The world reacted in many ways, but one thing was clear. No one would ever forget the war in Iraq. Chapter 10. The Cost of War. War always comes at a price. The invasion of Iraq was no different. It changed lives forever. For Iraq, it meant cities destroyed, families broken, and dreams lost. For the U.S. and its allies, it meant soldiers killed, billions of dollars spent, and a long, painful struggle. When the war began in 2003, many people hoped for a quick victory. They believed Iraq would soon find peace. But as the months passed, the situation grew worse. Fighting continued. Bombs exploded in crowded streets. Soldiers and civilians lost their lives every day. In Iraq, the cost of war was everywhere. Homes were destroyed, markets were empty, schools were closed, families lived in fear. Many had to leave their homes and move to safer places. Some never returned. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Doctors struggled to treat the injured. There were not enough medicines. Many people suffered from wounds, both physical and emotional. Children were scared. Parents worried. The future seemed dark. The war took lives. Thousands of Iraqi civilians died. Many were caught in crossfire. Others died from airstrikes, car bombs, or fighting between armed groups. Each life lost was a story. Someone's father, mother, or child. For U.S. and Allied soldiers, the cost was also high. Thousands lost their lives in battle. Families back home waited for news, hoping their loved ones were safe. Some soldiers returned home with serious injuries. Others suffered from trauma, haunted by what they had seen. The financial cost of the war was massive. The U.S. government spent billions of dollars on weapons, equipment, and military operations. Every day, planes flew, tanks moved, and supplies were delivered. The cost of keeping soldiers in Iraq was high. Rebuilding Iraq was another challenge. Roads, bridges, and power plants had been destroyed. Water was not always clean. Electricity was unreliable. The U.S. and other countries tried to help, but progress was slow. Corruption and violence made rebuilding difficult. For many Iraqis, life became a daily struggle. Finding food was hard. Getting a job was almost impossible. People wanted stability, but war made it difficult. Some felt hopeless. Others tried to stay strong. The psychological cost of war was heavy. People lived with fear every day. They worried about their children, their homes, and their future. Soldiers, too, carried the burden. Many struggled to forget the horrors they had seen. Some found it hard to return to normal life. Years passed, but the war left deep scars. Some cities never fully recovered. Families who lost loved ones still felt the pain. The war had changed Iraq forever. In the U.S., the cost of war was felt in different ways. Many people questioned if it was worth it. They asked if the money spent could have been used for schools, hospitals, or other needs. They wondered if the loss of lives had brought any real change. Politicians debated. Some said the war was necessary to remove Saddam Hussein. They believed Iraq would be better without him. Others disagreed. They said the war created more problems than it solved. The global impact of the war was also great. Oil prices rose. The world economy was affected. Other countries feared the spread of conflict. The invasion of Iraq had consequences far beyond its borders. For the soldiers who survived, life was not easy. Many returned home, but they felt different. They struggled with memories of war. Some found it hard to find work. Others could not sleep without nightmares. For the Iraqi people, the war brought lasting pain. It divided communities. It created new enemies. It forced people to make difficult choices, stay and fight, or leave and start again. Despite the pain, some people never lost hope. Iraqis tried to rebuild their lives. They opened small businesses. They helped their neighbors. They sent their children to school. They dreamed of a better future. The cost of war is not just money. It is not just buildings destroyed. It is the loss of life, the loss of dreams, and the loss of peace. Looking back, the question remains, was the war worth it? Some say yes, others say no, but one thing is clear. The cost of war is always high. As you listen to this story, think about what war really means. Think about the people who lived through it. Think about the lessons it teaches. The war in Iraq left a heavy burden. It affected soldiers, families, and entire communities. The cost of war will be felt for generations to come. Chapter 11. What did we learn? The 2003 invasion of Iraq taught the world many lessons. It changed how countries plan wars. It changed how leaders make decisions. It changed how people view war itself. At first, the invasion seemed simple. The U.S. and its allies believed they could remove Saddam Hussein quickly. They thought Iraq would welcome freedom. They thought rebuilding the country would be easy. But things did not go as planned. One important lesson was that war is never easy. Removing a leader is only the beginning. After Saddam Hussein was gone, Iraq fell into chaos. There was no clear government. There was no safety. Armed groups fought for power. The lesson was clear. Winning a war is not just about defeating an army. It is about rebuilding a country. Leaders learned that intelligence must be accurate. The U.S. went to war because they believed Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, but no such weapons were found. This mistake damaged trust. Many people felt they had been misled. Future wars would need better planning and stronger evidence. Another lesson was that war affects everyone. Soldiers fought on the battlefield, but families at home suffered too. Iraqi families lost their homes. American and Allied families lost their loved ones. The cost of war was higher than anyone expected. The invasion also showed the world the power of media. People everywhere watched the war on their television screens. They saw bombs falling. They saw cities burning. They saw soldiers fighting. War was no longer far away. It was in their living rooms every day. This changed how people thought about conflict. One of the biggest lessons was that rebuilding a country takes time. After the war, Iraq needed new leaders. It needed new schools, hospitals, and jobs. But it also needed trust. People had to believe in their future. Without trust, rebuilding was slow and difficult. Soldiers learned important lessons too. They learned that fighting in cities is different from fighting in open fields. They learned that working with local people is important. Winning hearts and minds is just as important as winning battles. The world also learned about the danger of division. After Saddam's fall, Iraq was divided. Different groups wanted power. Old rivalries became new conflicts. Religious and political differences grew stronger. Iraq became a place of violence. The lesson was clear. Peace is hard when people are divided. Countries around the world learned that war can create more problems than it solves. The invasion was meant to bring peace and democracy, but it also brought new enemies. Groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS grew stronger. Iraq became a battlefield for many different fights. The war also changed international relations. Some countries supported the invasion. Others said it was wrong. The United Nations was divided. Trust between countries was shaken. Leaders learned that working together is not always easy. Economically, the war was expensive. The U.S. spent billions of dollars. Iraq's economy was damaged. Oil production was disrupted. Many people lost their jobs. The lesson was clear. War is costly, not just in lives, but in money too. For Iraqis, the lessons were personal. They learned that war brings suffering, but also hope. Some people saw the war as a chance to build a better country. Others felt it destroyed their future. Different people learned different things. In schools, teachers spoke about the war. Children asked questions. They wanted to understand why their lives had changed. They wanted to know if things would ever go back to normal. The war taught them to value peace. The U.S. military learned new strategies. They learned that local knowledge is important. They worked with Iraqi leaders to bring stability. They understood that war is not just about fighting, it is about building relationships. Over time, governments changed their approach. They focused more on diplomacy. They used more intelligence and fewer weapons. They tried to solve problems before they turned into wars. Some leaders admitted their mistakes. They said they should have listened more. They said they should have planned better. These lessons helped shape future policies. Despite everything, Iraqis showed resilience. They kept moving forward. They built new homes. They started new businesses. They sent their children to school. They proved that even in the darkest times, hope can survive. The world also learned that peace is fragile. Even after the fighting stopped, violence could return. Peace is something that must be protected every day. Years later, people still ask, what did we learn from the Iraq War? The answers are different for everyone. Some say it showed the dangers of acting too fast. Others say it proved the need for strong leadership. For soldiers, it was a lesson in sacrifice. For families, it was a lesson in patience. For leaders, it was a lesson in responsibility. And for the world, it was a lesson in the true cost of war. As you listen to this story, think about what lessons you can take from it. Think about how war changes people, countries, and the world. The 2003 invasion of Iraq left many lessons behind. Some are painful, some are hopeful, but all of them are important for the future. Chapter 12. A War That Never Ends? Even years after the invasion, Iraq is still struggling. The war may be over, but its effects remain. Cities are rebuilding, but the scars of war are deep. Families are trying to move on, but memories of the past are not easy to forget. When the fighting stopped, many people thought peace would come. They hoped Iraq would become a strong and stable country, but the road to recovery has been long and difficult. Iraq's leaders faced many challenges. They needed to rebuild schools, hospitals, and homes. They needed to restore order and bring people together. But the damage was too great. The war had divided communities. Trust was broken. Violence did not disappear. Armed groups still caused trouble. Bombs exploded in markets and mosques. People feared for their safety. Even those who wanted peace had to live with danger. For many Iraqis, life was not easy. Some had lost everything, their homes, their families, their jobs. They tried to start over, but finding work was hard. Water and electricity were not always available. Prices were high. Hope was fading. The war had also left a new enemy in its wake. a group called ISIS rose from the chaos. They took over cities. They ruled with fear. The Iraqi army had to fight them. The battle was long and painful. Many people fled their homes once again. For the younger generation, the war was all they knew. They grew up hearing gunfire, seeing tanks, and living in fear. They wondered, would their country ever find peace? Despite these challenges, Iraqis have shown great strength. They continue to work hard. They refuse to give up. Many believe in a better future. They want to rebuild their country and their lives. In some parts of Iraq, life is improving. Schools have reopened. Markets are busy again. Roads are being repaired. People are trying to live normal lives. But it is not easy. The war left deep wounds that take time to heal. The question remains, can Iraq truly rebuild? Some believe it is possible. They say Iraq has rich resources, smart people, and a strong culture. Others are not so sure. They worry that the violence will return. The war also changed the way the world sees Iraq. Some countries now see Iraq as a fragile state. Others believe it can recover and become strong again. Iraq's future depends on its people, its leaders, and the support it receives. For the U.S. and its allies, the war left difficult questions. Was it the right decision? Did it bring more harm than good? Could things have been done differently? These questions remain even years later. Soldiers who fought in Iraq still carry the memories. Some feel proud of their service. Others feel sadness. Many struggle with the things they saw and experienced. The war changed their lives forever. For the Iraqi people, the dream of peace is still alive. They know it will take time. They know it will not be easy. But they believe in their country. They believe in their future. International organizations are helping Iraq rebuild. They provide money, food, and medical supplies. They support schools and hospitals. But real change must come from within. Iraq's leaders must work together. The Middle East also watches closely. Other countries fear that the violence in Iraq could spread. They hope Iraq will find peace and stability, but they know the challenges are great. Even today, Iraq faces many problems. Corruption is high. Trust in the government is low. Armed groups still exist. The journey to peace is long. But Iraq has a long history of strength. It has survived wars, invasions, and hardships before. Its people have always found a way to rebuild. They are determined to do so again. Looking to the future, Iraq stands at a crossroads. It can choose to learn from its past. It can choose to unite and rebuild. Or it can fall back into conflict. The choice is difficult, but hope remains. The story of Iraq is not over. The war changed everything, but the people are still writing their own future. They dream of a day without fear, a day when children can play outside without worry, a day when families can live in peace. As you listen to this story, think about the meaning of war. Think about its cost, its lessons, and its future impact. Can a country truly heal after so much pain? Will Iraq ever find lasting peace? The war in Iraq may have ended, but the struggle for a better future continues. And perhaps, with hope and determination, Iraq can rise again.